This is Jordan Poyer, safety for the Buffalo Bills, and you are now listening to Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Thompson, who once again is flying solo for the third piece in our offseason series on the Buffalo Bills. Those first two series you can find at cover1.net on how much cap space did the Bills really have, which of their free agents that I think that we should re-sign, and today, getting into the third piece in this series, which offensive free agents do I think the Buffalo Bills should pursue and potentially sign? Again, come on, check out everything we have going on at cover1.net. All kinds of awesome stuff coming out on the draft through this offseason series. And then hopefully soon next week, getting back into the swing of things with Aaron Quinn, talking about the upcoming position battles, the draft, free agency, and everything else going on with Buffalo. As we get into this third series today, I want to be able to take a look at what we can learn from the first few off seasons with Brandon Beane. I think he's shown a great deal of skill in finding market inefficiencies and pockets of value within free agency. Now, that's not to say that I won't throw out some names that would be fun splurge signings for the team to look at, but I think what he found in Quentin Spain, John Feliciano, John Brown, guys that weren't market-setting deals but still made significant contributions to the team, show where he's able to utilize free agency to our advantage and be able to bring in additional value that can give a return on that investment and actually exceed the contract that we signed them to. So I'm going to go position by position, talk about some players that we should pay attention to, and then wrap things up leading into our next in the series, which will be defensive wish list. So first is quarterback. Obviously, I don't expect a lot of action here. There are a handful of names out there in the backup free agent market. Trevor Siemian, Chase Daniel, Matt Moore. Some of those guys could make some sense. And be a little bit of a difference with Matt Barkley, but between Barkley's familiarity with the system, his support of Josh Allen, the value that he brings in the quarterback room, and his very reasonable $2 million cap number, I just don't think it's worth being able to kick around there for what might be a very minor upgrade in backup quarterback. We'll get into a little bit more in draft season, where I think there is a possibility that you should always be looking to bring in additional draft quarterbacks, where we may be able to increase that trade value down the line and always bringing in the next possible option to be a backup in the future. Running back is where things get a little bit more interesting. And I think that it's going to show what Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, Brian Dable think of Devin Singletary in what kind of back they think he can be. I think we saw down the stretch he showed that he can be the primary back in a modern NFL backfield, but I don't think any running back should be a bell cow back. I don't think any running back should be getting 25 to 30 carries. There's a much better way to build a modern backfield. I think that what you're seeing now with reports that Arizona may release David Johnson from his ridiculous contract, the Rams are listening to offers for Todd Gurley. There's a lot of opportunity to be able to build a modern NFL running back room without investing a ton of money. So I know there's fans who are going to be excited about Derrick Henry, Melvin Gordon, even Kenyon Drake, and I just don't see it. I don't see them going into double-digit $1 million per year on a player when we have Devin Singletary under 3 more years of a rookie deal and can add a supplement to that to have value. However, just because I don't think they're going to spend big, it doesn't mean I don't think they won't add a free agent. So now there are 2 pockets that I think they can look at. One is adding a between the tackles thumper to pair with Singletary and let him take advantage of his skill set in space. 3 of the names that are out there, they're all 6 foot, 225. They all have shown experience picking up tough yards between the tackles. You see 26-year-old Peyton Barber from Tampa Bay, 28-year-old Carlos Hyde from Houston and originally San Francisco, and 25-year-old Jordan Howard from Philadelphia and previously with Chicago. I think that these are the kind of guys that could take, a younger version of what that Frank Gore role was, be able to take a handful of carries per game, especially some of those tougher between the tackles carries, and save some of the most, taxing touches and most impactful touches off of Devin Singletary. Another option that they could look at is utilizing Singletary's shiftiness and contact balance in traffic, that he's actually pretty good between the tackles, and add more of a pure passing game complement. This would be a guy who would be potentially coming in to compete with TJ Yeldon or be an upgrade over him. Some of the names I see there could be Washington's Chris Thompson, who's 29, Seattle's CJ Prosise, who's 26, and San Francisco's Matt Breida, who's 25. All three are stellar out in space, coming out of the backfield. They also have the option to carry 6 to 8 times per game and be able to take a little bit of pressure off of Singletary that way, and could really add a little bit of flavor to the offense, where I think we're going to see a little more utilization of running back screens and running backs out of the backfield, both with a complement and from Singletary directly. So when you get into this, it's really in where they view Singletary and what kind of position they can go through. I expect to see an addition to the backfield, not only in free agency, but also in the draft. So whether we go in and add one who's a between the tackles thumper and then maybe draft a guy who's a little bit more nifty in space, or draft a receiving back or sign a receiving back and draft a thumper, I think we can add a lot more to this backfield. My recommendation would be to do one of those two things. You could draft a guy like Antonio Gibson, who's shown a great deal of niftiness out of the backfield from Memphis, playing both receiver and running back, and sign a guy like Jordan Howard to, say, 2 years, $6 million, $8 million, somewhere in the $3 to $4 million per year range, or that same kind of contract, a 2 year, $6 to $8 million deal for Chris Thompson, and then draft a guy like Zach Moss out of Utah. If you're telling me we go into next year with Devin Singletary, Chris Thompson, and Zach Moss in our backfield, I feel really good about our potential. The next position is the one who gets talked about the most, wide receiver. Obviously, there's some big names out there in free agency. A lot of people talking about Amari Cooper, AJ Green, and it would be awesome to see the Bills splurge on a guy like that. I think Amari Cooper made some comments in an interview with Tim Graham down to the Pro Bowl, making it pretty clear he doesn't have a lot of interest in coming up to the Green Bays and Buffaloes of the world. I think AJ Green's intriguing from a veteran presence. It all depends on the contract of what he wants. Some of the things that are projected where he could still want $15, $16 million a year. I just don't think that makes sense in what Buffalo is looking to do, especially if he's looking for 3 or 4 years at that kind of value. Taking a little step down from there, I wouldn't be shocked to see an Emmanuel Sanders out of San Francisco, or maybe the outside speedster from the Jets, Robbie Anderson. I think both of them could make sense. Both of them are looking to be able to break the bank, this being the final year that I think Emmanuel Sanders is going to get a contract, and Robbie Anderson being a guy who is looking to really cash in for the first time. But the area that I think really makes a lot of sense is with this historic draft class, I'd love to see us go in and draft 2 guys in this draft and add maybe a guy who is finishing his rookie deal, didn't get the opportunities to be able to show fully what he was capable of, and could be a nice return on investment that we could go after in a little sweet spot of underutilized players at receiver. There's 4 names that stuck out to me. Tajay Sharp from Tennessee is 6'2", 200 pounds, 25 years old. Rashard Higgins from Cleveland is 6'1", 200 pounds and 25 years old. Geronimo Allison is 26 from Green Bay, 6'3", 202. And Kansas City's Demarcus Robinson is 25, and he's 6'1", 202. All 3 guys are between 6'1" and 6'3". All 3 guys between 200 and 205 pounds. All of them 25 or 26 years old. So you probably caught a little bit of a trend there. They're the kind of guys that I think didn't get the right situation, either based on limited opportunities with incredible talent in front of them, like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce in front of Robinson, Devontae Adams in front of Geronimo Allison. Or a poor passing or quarterback situation like Sharp had in Tennessee and Higgins had in Cleveland. All 4 are young. I think they have untapped upside that you could still be able to develop, have decent size, and some legitimate explosiveness. I'd love to see the Bills snag one of those guys at a very reasonable deal, 3 years, $12 million, give some upside for the team if they start to show an improvement. I think all of them could come in and start day one while we're developing that rookie wide receiver. If you're telling me that we end up going pass rusher in the first round, but we added a guy like Rashard Higgins and then double dip in the draft, let's say we go into next year with a wide receiver room like John Brown, Cole Beasley, Rashard Higgins, Jalen Reagor from TCU and Michael Pittman from USC. Then all of a sudden in training camp, you're talking about Andre Roberts, Duke Williams, Isaiah McKenzie, and Robert Foster all fighting for one roster spot. That's the kind of talent that I think is going to legitimately upgrade. It's one more year of guys like John Brown and Cole Beasley, building chemistry with Josh Allen, adding in 2 guys from a historic draft class that would have gone earlier in previous drafts. And this year we can get a better value on those, but still adding a little bit of veteran talent with a guy who was underutilized in another system. So I know my co-host Aaron likes Tajay Sharp a lot. I'm a big fan of Higgins. I wouldn't mind seeing them go after someone like Demarcus Robinson, who I think has some explosiveness that could really add a lot to it and also be an option in the return game to compete with Andre Roberts. So that's the kind of investment I'd like to see. Again, it would be great to be able to see a big splurge signing, but I think this is a more logical path based on what we've seen previously from Brandon Beane. Tight end is a position that I hear talked about a lot, and I hear a lot of people throwing around names like Hunter Henry or Austin Hooper, but I just don't see it. Those are guys who I think are going to be looking for 4 or 5 year deals, averaging $10 million a season, and $40 or $50 million just doesn't make sense at the tight end position when we already have 5 guys under contract for next year. They made 2 draft investments last year in Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney, both of whom came along pretty nicely. Tyler Kroft was injured. Lee Smith was a great blocker, but had some injury, some penalty issues and wasn't able to, always play clean. Jason Kroom was on IR all year. But that's 5 guys coming back next year who are NFL caliber tight ends. If not for the recent release of Carolina's Greg Olsen, I don't know that I would project any change. I probably would project that those 5 simply come back and that the top 3 or 4 of them make the roster. However, with Greg Olsen making his visits, he's going around to places like Buffalo, going to Washington to see Ron Rivera, going out to Seattle, and looking to make a decision later on this week. If there's a chance you could bring in a guy like that on a 1 or 2 year deal at $5 or $6 million, so instead of $40 or $50 million, you're talking about maybe $10 million on Greg Olsen total in a short-term deal, you could release a player like Tyler Kroft and almost have it be a net neutral, not add any money, but get a material upgrade in the short term on Greg Olsen. I don't think Olsen is the answer in the way that an Austin Hooper or Hunter Henry is, but I think he's better than Tyler Kroft. I think he's a legitimate veteran tight end that can really be what Frank Gore was to Devin Singletary for Dawson Knox. And having that kind of veteran presence in the locker room, a guy who's a Walter Payton Man of the Year winner bringing into this locker room where Lorenzo Alexander is leaving, I think that's a legitimate option. And I think that if they're not able to lobby Olsen to sign with Buffalo, or that he gets, offered a big chunk of money from one of those other teams, I think you let him walk, and I think you bring back the guys that we have. I think, another healthy offseason, hopefully, from Tyler Kroft to build chemistry with Josh Allen is worth being able to go through and to evaluate. Can we get a little bit more from that? Can we understand where some of that value may be, and can we see another step forward from Dawson Knox, and that we may see a better tight end room next year without actually adding any additional talent outside of the room. Getting into the offensive line, I'm going to start with the interior. Obviously, we saw a significant contribution last year, bringing in Mitch Morse, John Feliciano, and Spencer Long, as well as Ryan Bates. We brought back Ike Botker. That's a lot of investment in the offensive line and the interior without even getting into Quentin Spain's free agency. I think that they have enough guys right now, not even including the possibility of moving Cody Ford in from tackle to guard if they need to. If they're not able to reach a deal with Quentin Spain, there's a few names out there. Brandon Scherf is going to break the bank at guard, potentially $16 million plus. Joe Thuney from New England is going to be a huge deal as well. He might get somewhere between 12 and 15 million. They sound great. They'd be welcome upgrades and would be awesome players to add. I'll be honestly a bit surprised if they go that route to be able to invest that. I'd certainly be open to it, but I'd be very surprised if they do something like that. I think ideally you look to bring back Quentin Spain somewhere in that 3-year, $15 to $18 million range. A name that may come up if they're not able to reach a deal with Quentin Spain or he gets paid more is a player like Darrell Williams. He had traditionally played tackle at Carolina, but actually ended up playing quite a bit last year at left guard and looked pretty good. He was always a player that projected well to guard. So I think that there's a possibility that they'd be able to bring in a guy like him at around the same number that they'd be offering Quentin Spain. I also think you could draft someone like John Simpson out of Clemson. I like him a lot, and groom him as a potential replacement, whether that's for Spain or Williams, or a guy like Feliciano or Spencer long term, and would be an upgrade over an Ike Bacher or a Ryan Bates for long-term potential. The final position we'll talk about on offense here is offensive tackle. Obviously, there are some big names out there. Anthony Costanzo out of Indianapolis, Jack Conklin out of Tennessee, Brian Balaga out of Green Bay. All three have the possibility to play right tackle. Costanzo's played more left tackle. And I think that that's a possibility, but I just don't see that being the area that we invest in here. The Bills have Deion Dawkins locked in at left tackle, and he's ready for an extension of his own. At right tackle, Cody Ford, I think, showed enough potential to continue his platoon with Ty Nsekhe. I've always thought he would be a better guard than tackle, but I think he showed enough potential there to give that another run. Ty Nsekhe was pretty solid to be able to rotate in and out there, although he is, getting up there in age. In the previous piece, I talked about the value of re-signing a guy like Ladrian Waddle to a 2-year, $4 million deal. There's a few paths that I think it's possible that if Quentin Spain isn't able to be re-signed, and we decide that we do want to kick Cody Ford inside the guard, I think you'd move him to right guard. You'd kick Feliciano over to left guard. You'd keep Spencer Long as the rotational piece interior. I think in that case, you could look at maybe bringing in a young, athletic right tackle that could platoon with Ty Nsekhe and kind of develop underneath them. The two players are Seattle's Jermaine Ifedi out of Seattle, and a player who's shown some potential and development, and also Halupa Ladabaitai out of Philadelphia, a 26-year-old tackle as well. In Philadelphia, there's a ton of talent, and Vaitai has had an opportunity to get on the field here and there, but it has just a ton of gifted guys in front of him. When you talk about Elaine Johnson and Jason Peters, both are very physically gifted, and I think you might be able to snag them in the same range that you had Quentin Spain at that 3 years, $15 to $18 million deal. So it's an area that I think it's likely we could look at in the draft. What's most realistic is that we end up sticking at tackle with Dawkins and Waddle at left tackle, Ford and Nsekhe at right tackle. We've got four guys who can all play, and that's the kind of path that they take going forward. But there's a few things that could shake that up if things open up differently. On the offensive side, I know that many fans maybe had visions of some splashier signings here in their mind's eye, but I believe Brandon Beane's track record has shown a propensity for identifying market inefficiencies and pockets of value. The names that I identified here are ones that I believe they're the range of players that will fit at the right price and the right opportunity for return on investment to actually exceed the contracts that we sign, which is what we saw last year in exceeding the value of Quentin Spain, exceeding the value of John Brown, exceeding the value of John Feliciano, and each of the contracts those guys signed. That's what we want to see. When you bring in a guy for $20 million a year, which is what's projected for an Amari Cooper, he has to be an all-pro player just to break even and just to earn his contract. And not that I don't want to see that and wouldn't be open to a big-time player like that, but I think you have to be careful in how you do that and what they could add. So that's going to do it here for today on the offensive side of the ball. Tune in next where we get into our defensive wish list. You guys might be a little bit excited to be able to identify some of the value that I might be a little splashier on that side of the ball with some of the signings. So you have to take a listen to what we do there, but continue checking out this offseason series. A lot of really good content coming on at cover1.net. You'll be excited to see all the draft breakdowns, everything that we have going on. But you have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.